On the night of my 75th birthday, my son's wife poured a full glass of red wine over my head and screamed that I was a worthless old fool who needed to die already. My own son sat next to her and laughed. He actually laughed. Then he leaned forward, his face flushed from too much champagne, and told me, "Dad, just sign the papers tonight or don't bother coming to my funeral when I bury you." I wiped the wine from my eyes with a cloth napkin in my lap, smiled at the 17 guests sitting around my dining table, and excused myself to use the restroom. I locked the door, pulled out my phone, and dialed my late wife's brother. "Roman," I said. "It's exactly as you predicted. Pull the trigger." 40 minutes later, every single person at that table had lost everything they thought they owned. Before I tell you the rest, let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and hit subscribe if you've ever had a family member look you in the eye and treat you like you were already dead. The wine was still dripping off my eyebrows when I walked back into the dining room. I dabbed my face dry, but my white dress shirt was ruined, a deep purple stain spreading from my collar down to my belt. My daughter-in-law, Camille, was already pouring herself another glass from a different bottle, the one she'd brought specifically because she said my taste in wine was, and I'm quoting here, "what poor people drink when they're trying to feel rich." I sat back down at the head of the table. Nobody stood up for me. Nobody offered a clean napkin. My son Wesley was scrolling on his phone. The 17 guests, mostly Camille's friends and a few of my son's business associates I'd never met before, all pretended very hard that nothing had happened. My wife's sister, who'd flown in from Tucson to celebrate with me, was the only one who looked truly horrified. She was clutching her own napkin like she wanted to throw it at someone. "You done sulking?" Camille asked. She didn't look at me when she said it. She was reapplying her lipstick using the back of a soup spoon as a mirror. "Because we still have business to discuss, Frederick. The papers don't sign themselves." I will tell you something about Camille that took me too many years to understand. She was not impulsive. The wine in my face was not a moment of passion. She had practiced that move. I could tell because she didn't flinch when she did it. She watched the arc of the wine the same way a baseball pitcher watches his fastball cross the plate. She'd thought about it in advance. She'd decided that publicly humiliating a 75-year-old man in front of his birthday guests was the most efficient way to break me down before the contract conversation, and my son had agreed to it. That was the part that hollowed me out. He'd agreed. "Tell me about the papers again, son," I said. I made my voice gentle. I made my voice old. I let it shake a little at the end. I'm not sure I followed everything earlier. Wesley looked up from his phone. He had this expression I'd seen on him since he was 16, the one he wore when he thought he was about to win something. His mother used to call it his fox face. He had it now. He set the phone down, leaned forward, and started talking to me like I was a confused child at the DMV. "Okay, Dad. One more time. The lake house in Coeur d'Alene, the cabin in Montana, the condo in Seattle, the 2 commercial properties on Aurora. We need you to sign over the deeds tonight." Camille's lawyer drew up the transfer paperwork. "It's all clean. It's all legal. You keep a life estate in the lake house so you can still visit, but the title moves to me and Camille." He took a breath. "Dad, you're 75. You can't manage all of this anymore. The IRS is going to come after you. You need to simplify your life. And honestly, after Mom died, you've been forgetting things. We're worried about you." I had not forgotten anything. My memory was sharper at 75 than it had been at 50. I had made a list every night for the past 2 years of every lie my son and his wife had told me, and that list was now 73 pages long, single-spaced, locked in a fireproof safe in my study. But I nodded. I let my eyes go a little watery. I picked up my water glass with a slightly shaky hand. "I just want what's best for you, son. I just don't know if tonight is the right time. In front of all these people." "Tonight is exactly the right time," Camille said. She finally turned to face me. Her eyes were the color of swimming pool tile, and they had no warmth in them at all. Because tomorrow, you'll come up with another excuse. Last month it was your knee surgery. Before that it was the holidays. Before that it was tax season. We are done waiting, Frederick. Sign the papers or get out of our lives. Wesley and I are willing to walk away tonight and never speak to you again. You'll never see your grandson, not at his recitals, not at his graduations, not at his wedding. We will tell him you died of a stroke. We will let him believe that for the rest of his life. That was the line. That was the moment. Because they thought they were threatening me with something I couldn't survive. My grandson Theodore was 4 years old, and he was the only thing on this earth I would have walked through fire for. Camille knew that. Wesley knew it. They'd been holding Theodore over my head like a knife for 2.5 years, ever since they figured out that he was the only leverage they had left. Every visit was a negotiation. Every phone call had a price. Wesley had once charged me $8,000 to attend Theodore's 3rd birthday party. He called it a consulting fee. I paid it. I'd paid all of it. Because I thought as long as I kept paying, I'd still be a grandfather. I'd been wrong. I looked around the table. I looked at the 17 strangers eating my food. I looked at the catering staff. I was paying double overtime because Camille had insisted on a black tie service. I looked at my son, who I had taught to ride a bicycle on a quiet street in Bellevue 42 years ago. I looked at my daughter-in-law, who had married him for what she thought he was going to inherit, and I felt something inside me close, like a vault door. The man who had walked into this dining room 2 hours ago, the man who'd been hoping his son might still surprise him, that man was finished. He was put away, and in his place was someone older, colder, and considerably more prepared. "Excuse me," I said. "I need a moment." I stood up. My knees did hurt. That part wasn't an act. I walked past the long table, past the catering staff, past my wife's sister, who reached out and squeezed my wrist as I went by. I walked to the powder room under the stairs, locked the door, and looked at myself in the mirror. The wine had stained my hair pink in places. There was a small cut on my temple where the rim of the glass had grazed me on its way past my face. I washed my hands. I straightened my tie. I pulled out my phone. Roman picked up on the first ring. "Tell me," he said. "It's exactly as you predicted," I said. "Pull the trigger." There was a pause on the other end. Roman was 68 years old, retired 3 years ago from 31 years as a federal forensic accountant. He'd worked organized crime cases, securities fraud, the kind of investigations where one wrong number on one wrong spreadsheet could put a man in prison for 2 decades. He was my late wife's younger brother, and after she died, he was the only family I had left who was actually family. He'd warned me about Wesley and Camille for years. I hadn't listened. Tonight I was listening. "You sure, Frederick? Once we go, we go. There's no calling this back." "They threatened to take Theodore from me," I said. "Camille poured wine on my head in front of 17 people. Wesley laughed. I heard him exhale. 40 minutes, he said. "The marshals are already staged in Bellevue. The bank freeze goes live in 6 minutes. I'll have the documents emailed to you within 10. Don't sign anything they put in front of you within 10. Don't sign anything they put in front of you. Stall." "I can stall," I said. "Frederick, one more thing. Are you safe in that house?" I thought about it. I thought about Camille, who I'd watched throw a wine glass once before at a waitress in Palm Springs over a temperature dispute about her steak. I thought about Wesley, who I no longer recognized. "I'll be fine for 40 minutes, I said. "Stay near a window," Roman said. "If anything happens, get outside. The patrol cars can be there in 90 seconds. I hung up. I splashed water on my face. I dried off with one of the linen guest towels my wife had embroidered with our initials 30 years ago. I unlocked the door. I walked back to the dining room and took my seat at the head of the table. "All right," I said, "let's talk about the papers." Camille smiled. It was the first time she'd smiled all night. "I knew you'd come around," she said. She slid a manila folder down the table toward me. It was thick, maybe 40 pages, with little yellow tabs sticking out where I was supposed to sign. I opened it. I made a show of putting on my reading glasses. I licked my thumb and turned the first page very slowly. I asked questions about every paragraph. I asked what a quitclaim deed was, even though I'd signed dozens in my career. I asked what consideration meant. I asked what in perpetuity meant. Camille's smile got tighter and tighter. Wesley's legs started bouncing under the table. "Dad, just sign," he said. "I want to understand what I'm signing, son. You've always told me to read everything." I had built my company on reading everything. I had not told Wesley that part. Wesley believed I was a retired contractor who had done okay for himself with a small construction company up in Linwood. That was the story I'd told him his whole life. The truth was that I'd sold a controlling interest in a building materials supply chain to a private equity group in 2009 for $148 million. I owned the lake house outright. I owned the Montana cabin outright. I owned the Seattle condo outright. I owned both commercial properties on Aurora outright. I owned a 40% stake in a privately held lumber distributor that paid me roughly $11,000 a week in distributions. None of this was visible from the outside. I drove a 2014 Chevy Silverado. I shopped at Costco. I clipped coupons not because I needed to, but because my wife had liked doing it on Sunday mornings, and I'd kept doing it after she died because it made me feel like she was still in the kitchen. Wesley thought I was worth at most $4 million. He thought the lake house was the crown jewel. He had no idea what I actually was. And I had kept it that way, deliberately, for 20 years. Because his mother and I had agreed when he was a teenager that he had a soft, hungry streak that money would only sharpen. We'd wanted to see who he became before we told him what he stood to inherit. His mother died before she got to see who he became. I had now seen. "Page 19, I said. "Can you walk me through this clause again? The one about the power of attorney?" Camille reached across the table and put her hand on top of mine. Her nails were sharp. "Frederick, you don't need to understand every line. That's why I hired the lawyer. He vouches for it." "Camille, sweetheart," I said. "Where is the lawyer? Shouldn't he be here for this?" She blinked. Her hand tightened on mine. "He's available by phone." "Maybe we should call him," I said. "I have some questions only he could answer." Wesley stood up so fast his chair tipped backward. The whole table jumped. The 17 guests, who had been pretending to ignore the conversation, all suddenly pretended even harder to ignore the conversation. Wesley walked around the table and stood right behind my chair, close enough that I could smell the champagne on his breath. "Dad," he said, very low, very calm, "if you don't sign these papers in the next 5 minutes, I am going to call Adult Protective Services from this house tonight and tell them my father has dementia and is being financially exploited by a niece who came in from Tucson to take advantage of him." He looked across the table at my wife's sister, a 69-year-old retired school teacher who'd never asked me for a dime in her life, went pale. "You wouldn't," I said. "I would," Wesley said. "I have the recording from the phone call 3 weeks ago where you couldn't remember the name of your own dog. I'll send it to APS. They'll come tomorrow morning. They'll start an investigation. By the end of the week, you'll be in a memory care facility in Renton, and I'll be your conservator." I had remembered the name of my dog. The dog's name was Murphy. I had paused on the phone, deliberately, for 3 full seconds, because I had wanted Wesley to think I was slipping. Roman had told me to plant those moments. He'd told me they would be useful later. He had been right. "Wesley," I said, "sit down. Sign the papers." "Sit down, son. Sign the papers. Sit down, son. Please." He didn't sit down. Instead, he reached over my shoulder, picked up the pen, and pressed it into my hand. He closed my fingers around it. He held my fist, and then while 17 guests watched, My 48-year-old son tried to physically force my hand to sign a deed transferring my lake house to him. That was the second line. That was the moment, the last little piece of me that was still hoping, the small, stupid piece that had kept me sending Christmas cards and birthday checks and tuition payments for 2 decades, that piece died at the dining room table. I let my hand go limp. I didn't fight him. I let the pen scratch a meaningless squiggle across the signature line. And then I looked up at him, and I smiled, and I said, very quietly, so only he could hear, "Theodore is going to grow up knowing exactly what kind of man you are. I'm going to make sure of it." Wesley's grip on my hand loosened. Something in his face did something I'd never seen it do before. It flickered, like a light bulb about to go out. That was when the doorbell rang. The catering manager, a young woman with a clipboard, started walking toward the foyer. I held up my hand. "I'll get it," I said. I stood up, very deliberately, and I walked to the front door. I could feel the entire dining room watching me. I opened the door. There were 6 federal marshals on my front porch. Behind them, in the circular driveway, were 3 black SUVs and 2 King County sheriff's cars. The marshal in front, a tall woman with gray hair pulled back tight, held up a leather wallet with a badge. "Mr. Frederick Ashland," she said. "That's me." "Ma'am, sir, we have a search warrant for the residence and a separate arrest warrant for one Wesley Carl Ashland and one Camille Renata Voss Ashland. We also have a federal seizure order for assets at this address. May we come in?" "Please do," I said. I stepped back. "They're in the dining room." The marshals came in fast, not running. They didn't have to run. They moved the way professionals move, fanning out, 2 of them going to the back of the house, 2 of them heading straight for the dining room. The dining room exploded. Camille screamed. One of the guests dropped a wine glass. Wesley tried to stand up, and a marshal put a hand on his shoulder and said very calmly, "Sit down, sir," hands flat on the table. I walked back to my seat at the head of the table. I sat down. I picked up my fork, and I cut a piece of the prime rib I had paid for, and I put it in my mouth, and I chewed it slowly. "Dad," Wesley said. He was crying. "Dad, what's happening? Dad, what's you do?" I swallowed. I patted my mouth with my napkin. The wine stain on my shirt had dried to the color of old bruise. "Wesley," I said, "do you remember last August when I asked you about a charitable donation you'd made to a foundation called the Ashland Family Trust?" He stared at me. "You told me you'd given $2 million to a children's hospital. You sent me a photograph of you handing a comically large check to a doctor in scrubs. You said it was important to you to give back in your mother's memory. Do you remember?" He nodded. He couldn't speak. "There is no Ashland Family Trust, Wesley. There's no children's hospital. The doctor in the photograph is an actor named Phil from a casting agency in Los Angeles. The check was a prop. The $2 million went to a holding company in Delaware that you and Camille set up 19 months ago to launder funds out of the construction loan you took out under my name. The construction loan I never authorized. The construction loan you forged my signature on. 18 months ago, for $4.2 million. Do you remember now?" The marshal who'd put a hand on Wesley's shoulder pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Sir," she said, "Wesley Carl Ashland, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, and aggravated forgery against an elder. You have the right to remain silent." She kept reading him his rights. I tuned it out. I looked at Camille instead. She was sitting very still, both hands flat on the table, her swimming pool eyes fixed on me. She didn't look surprised. That was the most interesting part. She looked like a chess player who had just realized she was 3 moves from checkmate. "Frederick," she said, very quietly, "you don't want to do this, don't I? I have insurance, Frederick. I have files. If I go down, things come out. About Wesley. About Theodore." "What about Theodore?" She didn't answer, but the look on her face told me everything I needed to know about what she'd been holding back. I felt a coldness in my stomach. I'd known something was wrong with Theodore's situation for a long time. Wesley and Camille had been strange about him from the moment he was born. They wouldn't let me have a single solo visit with him. They monitored every phone call. When he was 2, I'd asked to attend his pediatrician appointment, and Camille had had a small, controlled fit about it. I had thought it was just controlling behavior. Now I understood it might be something else. A second marshal walked over to Camille. He was holding handcuffs. Camille Renata Voss Ashland, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy to defraud the United States, and, he glanced at me, then back at her, child custody fraud. What? Camille said. Her voice cracked. Ma'am, please stand up. Hands behind your back. I looked at Roman's text message that had just arrived on my phone 15 seconds before. It said, pulled hospital records and discovery. Theodore Ashland was born to a surrogate. The surrogate was paid in cash and signed a non-disclosure. The egg was Camille's. The sperm was not Wesley's. We don't know whose it is yet, but it isn't Wesley's. I read it twice, then a third time. I felt very cold. Then I felt very cold. Then I felt very calm. Theodore was still my grandson in every way that mattered. I had held him as an infant. I had taught him to clap his hands. I had been the first person he had said the word boat to. He was 4 years old, and he was the only thing in this house that was clean. None of what I'd just read changed any of that. It only changed Wesley's relationship to him, and it explained, finally, why Camille had been so terrified of letting any doctor or any blood relative get too close to Theodore. She had stolen something even from her own husband. I looked at Wesley. He was still being read his rights. He had no idea yet. I decided in that moment that I would not be the one to tell him. He would learn it from a discovery document in 3 months when his lawyer pulled the file. Let him have one more season of believing he had a son. It was more mercy than he had shown me. Take her out the front, I said to the marshal. Both of them. I want the neighbors to see. The marshal nodded. Camille started to say something and then stopped. She looked at the manila folder on the table. The papers I was supposed to sign. The papers that would have transferred everything she thought I owned. She looked at Wesley in handcuffs. She looked at the 17 guests, every single one of whom was now filming on their phones. She looked back at me one last time, and I swear to you, I saw her calculating, even then, how to spin this, how to be the victim, how to walk this back. There was no walking it back. The marshal put a hand on her elbow and steered her out of the dining room. The 17 guests all stood up at once like someone had pulled a fire alarm. They started grabbing their coats. The catering staff started clearing plates. My wife's sister came around the table and sat down in Wesley's empty chair and reached across and held my hand, and her hand was shaking and I realized mine was too. Frederick, she said. Frederick, my God. It's all right, Margaret, I said. Margaret was not her real name, but I'd called her Margaret since I was 26 years old because of an inside joke with my late wife. I'd never explained to anyone. It's all right. I knew it was coming. I've known for 2 years. 2 years? Roman warned me when Wesley took out the construction loan. We've been building the case ever since. Tonight was the trap. You knew they were going to do this. I knew they were going to do this. I knew they were going to do something. I didn't know it would be a wine glass to the face. I thought it might just be the papers. Wesley got carried away. I looked at the wine stain on my shirt. Camille got carried away. The last marshal in the dining room walked over to me. She was carrying a clear plastic evidence bag with the manila folder of forged papers inside. Mr. Surbeet Ashland, she said. We're going to need a formal statement. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. at the Federal Building downtown. You'll need a victim's advocate. We can arrange one. My brother-in-law will be representing me, I said. Roman Voss, retired forensic accountant for the Bureau. She raised an eyebrow. Roman Voss is your brother-in-law? He was my wife's little brother. He's been the one putting this case together. She smiled. It was a small, dry, professional smile. Mr. Ashland, you are in extremely good hands. We'll see you at 10. After the marshals left, after the guests left, after the catering staff packed up their warming trays and slipped out the side door with their tip envelopes, after Margaret made me a cup of black tea in the kitchen and refused to let me clean up the dining room myself, I went and sat in my study, the room my wife had decorated 30 years ago. The leather chair she'd bought me for my 50th birthday, the framed photograph of her on the desk, taken on a beach in Oregon when she was 34 years old and pregnant with Wesley, smiling at the camera in a way that I could no longer look at directly without my chest going tight. I picked up the phone and called Roman. "It's done," I said. "I know," he said. "I've been on the line with the marshals all night." "Frederick. Theodore. We need to talk about Theodore." "I read your text. There's more." "The surrogate is willing to talk. She kept a journal. She has receipts. She has the donor identification number. We can find out who his biological father is. And, Frederick, Camille's parents knew. They helped pay for it." I closed my eyes. Camille's parents lived in a gated community in Scottsdale. They had been at Theodore's first birthday. They had cooed over him. They had told me, to my face, that he had the Voss family nose. They had known every minute that they were lying. "What happens to Theodore now?" I said. "That's the question I want you to answer carefully," Roman said. "Camille is going to prison. Wesley is going to prison. Theodore is going to need a guardian. You are the closest living relative on either side and the only one with no criminal exposure. But Frederick, he is not biologically your grandson. If Camille's parents fight you for custody, they have a paper claim, even if it's a thin one. He is my grandson." "I know." I held him before he had a name. "I am his grandfather." "I know, Frederick. I'm telling you, the law is going to look at a lot of things, and we need to be ready. I've already retained a family law specialist. She's the best in the state. She'll be at your house at 9 tomorrow morning. We file emergency guardianship at noon." "9, I said. "Frederick, one more thing." "What?" "The wine stain on your shirt. Don't wash it. Don't take it to the dry cleaner. Put it in a paper bag and give it to me tomorrow. We're going to need it." "For what?" "Assault. She poured wine on you in front of 17 witnesses. I want everything we can use. I want her plea offer to be no offer." I hung up. I sat in the leather chair for a long time. The house was very quiet. Murphy, my old golden retriever, came in from the kitchen and put his head on my knee. He was 12 years old, and he had bad hips and his muzzle had gone white, and he looked up at me with the patient, slightly worried eyes that old dogs have, and I scratched behind his ears the way he liked, and I thought about my wife, and I thought about Theodore, and I thought about my son in a holding cell at the Federal Detention Center. And I thought about the years of my life I had spent paying my son to let me be a grandfather. And I thought about the silence in this house. This big, stupid house I had bought because my wife had loved the view. And I thought, for the first time in a very long time, that I was not going to die alone. I was going to fight for Theodore. I was going to win. He was going to grow up in this house, with this dog, with his great aunt visiting from Tucson, with a grandfather who would tell him the truth about everything, when he was old enough, in language that was honest and kind. He would know that the people who made him had not been good people. He would know that being made by someone is not the same as being raised by someone. He would know that family is something you build, not something you inherit. I went upstairs. I changed out of my ruined shirt. I hung it on a hanger in the closet. The wine stained dark and ugly under the closet light, and I left it there because Roman had told me to. I put on a clean undershirt. I went back downstairs. I sat at the kitchen table with Margaret, who had made herself a sandwich and was eating it without seeming to taste it, and I asked her if she would consider staying in Seattle for a few months, to help me with Theodore, to help me with the house. She said yes before I finished asking. "I will tell you the last thing, and then I will let you go. 3 weeks after that night, I sat in a small wood-paneled courtroom in downtown Seattle, and a judge granted me emergency temporary guardianship of my grandson. Theodore came to live with me the next afternoon. He was confused and quiet for the first 2 days. On the third day, he found Murphy, and Murphy found him, and the two of them fell asleep on the rug in the den, and I stood in the doorway and watched them breathe, and I cried for the first time since my wife's funeral 6 years before. Wesley took a plea deal. He's serving 11 years in a federal facility in Sheridan, Oregon. Camille got 14. Her parents are under indictment in Arizona for their role in the surrogacy fraud. The lake house is still mine. The cabin is still mine. The cabin is still mine. The condo is still mine. Everything Wesley wanted, every single dollar, every single deed, every single inch of property, is sitting in a trust now. And that trust has exactly one beneficiary. And his name is Theodore, and he will receive it on his 30th birthday, with a letter from me explaining where it came from and what it cost. I learned something at 75 years old that I should have learned at 45. The people who tell you that family loyalty means putting up with their cruelty are the people who depend on your loyalty to keep getting away with it. You do not owe anyone the right to humiliate you. You do not owe anyone the right to threaten your grandchildren. You do not owe your name to people who only want it for what's attached to it. The kindest thing I ever did for my son was stop protecting him from the consequences of who he had decided to become. The kindest thing I ever did for my grandson was refuse to be killed by his parents, slowly, at a dining room table on my own birthday. If you've ever been told that walking away from family makes you the bad one, I want you to know that sometimes walking away is the only way anyone gets to be saved. Hit that subscribe button if you believe a grandfather's job is to be a wall the wolves cannot get past, and I'll see you in the next story. I sat in my study the night after the marshals took my son and his wife away, and I tried to understand how I had let it get this far. The truth is not complicated, and I want to say it plainly, because I think a lot of fathers my age are sitting in their own studies tonight, asking themselves the same question. I had confused love with fear. For 20 years I had paid Wesley to tolerate me. I had told myself I was being generous. I told myself I was being a good father. But the honest accounting was different. I was afraid of being alone. I was afraid of dying without a grandchild's hand on mine, and Camille and Wesley had read that fear in my face the same way a card shark reads a tell, and they had played that hand for everything it was worth, year after year, until they decided the slow drip wasn't fast enough and tried to take it all in one night. What I want to say to you is this: cause and effect do not stop just because the people involved are family. If you reward bad behavior with money, you will get more bad behavior, and you will get more expensive bad behavior. If you teach a man that humiliating you is profitable, he will humiliate you in front of 17 guests on your 75th birthday. If you teach a woman that threatening your grandchild gets her what she wants, she will threaten your grandchild every single time, and she will get bolder with every win. None of this is mysterious. It is the same arithmetic that runs every other corner of life. We just refuse to see it when the numbers are written on people we love. The 3 things I held on to and the 3 things I want my grandson Theodore to learn from me before I am gone are these. Be a person of your word, even when no one is watching, because your character is the only thing in this world that nobody can forge or steal or sign away on a piece of paper. Use your mind, especially when your heart is screaming at you to do something foolish, because thinking clearly under pressure is the difference between a man who survives and a man who is taken apart at his own dining table. And when the moment comes, and it will come, find the strength to stand up. Not loud, not angry, just standing. Most people fold because they were never taught that standing up was an option. Roman saved my life by teaching me those 3 things over the course of 2 years of patient phone calls. I'm going to spend whatever years I have left teaching them to Theodore. He will not grow up the way Wesley grew up. He will grow up knowing that his grandfather once sat at a dining table covered in his own wine and decided, in the calmest part of his heart, that he was finished being afraid. That, in the end, was the only inheritance worth leaving him.